What killed the Angry Birds franchise?
Series quite as iconic as Angry Birds. After
Yeah.
being released in late 2009, the series would go on to have 3 billion total downloads, 2 movies, several spin-offs, and a lot of merchandise. The level of success this game about
I remember
Birds
playing
and
that.
Pigs led to
I
is
remember
so
playing that. Who
immaculate
remembers
that
playing
I can't
this?
even put it into words, but I'll try to show it as a visual. The last time I did a What Killed video, it was with my favorite tower defense series, Plants vs. Zombies. Here's the Google Trends graph for PvZ, and here's Angry Birds. Also, just for
Yikes.
fun, let's put me here too. But unlike the story of Plants vs. Zombies, where the series suffered...
That's
from
like, bro, I remember playing Plants vs. Zombies on my mom's phone, bro. Hey, I remember, like, you know, going to, like, a restaurant, dude. Like, going to a restaurant and then, like, asking your mom's, like, you know, phone because you're bored. You don't know what to do. You get your mom's phone and then, like, you're playing Plants vs. Zombies on there, bro. Same for Angry Birds, but I just don't have a clear memory on Angry Birds. But I have a clear memory on Plants vs. Zombies, though. I have a clear memory for Plants vs. Zombies.
Releases and simply how popular it was before, the Angry Birds series was largely killed with one bad decision. That being, the games being pulled directly from the App Store. At least, that's what
See?
most people believe. But the series actually had a pretty significant decline before that. In this video, I'm gonna go through the history and see the series of events that led to the downfall of one of mobile gaming's biggest icons.
Yeah.
In 2003, 3 Finnish university students, I'm not pronouncing these, entered a mobile game development competition at an event called the Assembly Demo Party. They basically partook in an early 2000s version of a game jam, and they made this game called King of the Cabbage World. They ended up winning the whole event, and this led to them starting a gaming company called Relude. The game itself ended up getting sold to a company called Sumiya. And
Chat, full screen? Do you want this video to be full screen? I remember playing Angry Birds racing game back in the day. I did remember that. I remember that too. Yeah?
being renamed to Mole
What?
War. 2 years passed, and Relude finally got its first round of investment, and the company was renamed to Rovio Mobile. They worked really hard to release a lot of games, but nothing quite worked out. That is, until 2009, when in December of that year,
I was
they
2 years
released
old.
their magnum opus, the very first Angry Birds game. It may have taken 6 years and 52 games, but they finally did it. Angry Birds was the most popular game of its time, and like its contemporaries, it follows...
Alright, I'm sorry for pausing again, but chat, you know what's like the weirdest? Okay, I did not, my first time playing Angry Birds was not on a mobile. It was on, okay, I'm gonna sound a nerd for just a second, and like sound like a boomer, but you know what, okay, back in the day, there was like Roku's. Roku's was like streaming apps, like you could stream on Netflix, YouTube, and you could play games on Roku thingies, and you could go into the App Store, and I play Angry Birds on a Roku, like a little remote on a Roku, like it's like you use something like that.
It's a simple gameplay loop with a lot of replayability. Basically, you have some birds, and you use them to break buildings to kill pigs.
Yeah.
The uniqueness in the levels comes from the different abilities each bird possesses. Just as a quick refresher, Red is boring and has no special ability. Chuck is faster than Red, but slightly weaker. The Blues are much weaker, but can split into 3 and completely destroy more spread out damage on weaker structures. Bomb explodes. Matilda lays an egg, and the egg explodes. Terrence is fat, and Hal is a boomerang that does boomerang things. Together they form the backbone that the level design could build off of, as each bird works best against certain materials. But the gameplay loop wasn't exactly their original idea. The gameplay concept for Angry Birds was taken from a Flash game made that same year, by the name of Crush the Castle. They share the same basic mechanics, where you have to hurl projectiles at an enemy base to kill enemies, but the slingshot works differently than the trebuchet, and in Angry Birds you have several different birds, each with unique abilities. Not to mention the more distinct variety in enemies and base materials. All things considered, I wouldn't call Angry Birds a ripoff, but it was at least heavily inspired. With Rovio finally securing a hit, they decided to take the obvious route and milk the Angry Birds series for all it's worth. By 2011, they'd already planned out the movie. And from 2010 to 2013, 8 different Angry Birds games were released.
I remember playing all of these. Okay, not this one. This one, I remember playing this. Angry Birds Space, Star Wars, these two Star Wars, Angry Birds Bad Piggies, and Angry Birds, I don't know what this one, but I think I remember playing this. I remember playing like almost every single one of these when I was little.
Including
I was the
some of
number one
most
Angry Birds
iconic
fan.
games in the series, like Seasons, Rio, Space, Star Wars, and Bad Piggies. A game that focused on the titular antagonists and has you creating these egg-stealing contraptions. And they also decided to become a video game publisher, making the games themselves. But the biggest thing they did when it came to profits was merchandise. When you make a game that revolves around little cartoon birds...
Do I have their Angry Birds plush? I do. I had more when I was little, but this is the only one I had. Alright, sorry for pausing. Let's get back.
attacking little cartoon pigs, it's only a matter of time until people want to buy said characters. In 2013, Rovio made $213 million.
Dang.
And roughly half of that income came from merchandise sales and licensing. Literally everyone owned at least one plushie. Even I still have a few lying around. The next year was where things
I just saw you, chat.
This year gave rise to a lot of new up-and-coming mobile games, and the Angry Birds series is now 5 years old. But Rovio still had some tricks up their sleeve to avoid falling out of relevance. They decided to take more risks with the series, and started to branch out. In late 2013, they released Angry Birds Go, a racing game that's completely different from the usual Angry Birds.
I remember playing that.
And while that game didn't do quite as well as expected, they decided to try to completely flip the script of the series with Angry Birds Epic. This is where I say the series peaked. Maybe not from a cultural relevance perspective.
I cannot speak.
While the
I got
confused
on that game.
Arcadey nature of the gameplay loop, Angry Birds Epic is a turn-based RPG that uses the Angry Birds characters to create a fun action.
I got confused on that game. I didn't even know what it was.
And published by Rovio, this game's a fun addition to the series that also uses the art style from Angry Birds Toons, a TV series that ran on Teletoon from 2013 to 2016. The different weapons, characters, and items add a fun layer of strategy. Not to mention the music in this game genuinely sounds great. Unfortunately, though, Angry Birds Epic wasn't as big of a success as Rovio had hoped for, and 110 people were laid off as a result of low profits from their recent endeavors. Those two games still got a ton of downloads, but I guess they just weren't too profitable. By the end of the year, Rovio profits were down 73%. Which caused them to lay off another 260 employees the next year. Then they chose to get back to basics, with Angry Birds 2. Ignoring the fact that this isn't the second Angry Birds game, Angry Birds 2 was a solid continuation of the original. There are new level gimmicks, and the art style was modernized, all the while keeping the same general
I still have Angry Birds 2 on my app.
But that year they'd also go more far out than ever. After seeing those, like, bubble shooting games on Facebook, Rovio realized that they were incredibly profitable, so they made a spin-off called Angry Birds Pop. This game has you shooting colored balls to remove other colored balls. On its own, it's just a mediocre puzzle shooter with an Angry Birds skin. But what's more interesting to see is that this is the direction where Rovio will soon be heading. In 2016, the Angry Birds
they just wanna
movie was released. Critically, it wasn't insanely well received, as it seems like just another generic
I remember seeing that in theaters.
But it did well financially, making $352 million at the box office. Those are some pretty big numbers, so it was only a matter of time until a second movie would be made. That same year, they released 2 more games. Some pinball-like game, Angry Birds Evolution, which used the designs from the movie, and Angry Birds Blast. It's a match 3 game. Yup, they saw Candy Crush and just went, we can do that. And they did, in fact, do that.
They add characters. They just want to add characters. They're like,
but we also got the second.
Let's just add characters and then boom, game.
I'd say it was a pointless cash grab that only reinforced my belief that Rovio is now solely in it for the money. But this movie was actually surprisingly decent, and it feels a lot more inspired than the first film, being a solid take on the heist movie format. Now we finally have their most recent blunder. Around mid-2019, Rovio had internally decided to stop updating their older Angry Birds titles. All of their older games were then removed without warning.
Yeah, that kind of
The next year, they released
sucks.
a statement saying they just stopped updating the older Angry Birds games due to them wanting to focus on newer games rather than just performing maintenance on older titles.
Wow.
This sounds fair enough, but that means that the older Angry Birds games would no longer be compatible on the newest devices. While I can definitely sympathize with Rovio, as it can be annoying to be solely known for something you've done so long ago, allowing the games to become unavailable isn't something they should have even considered. From an outsider's perspective, it just appears that Rovio was purposely removing the older games to force people to play their newer, arguably worse games.
Yeah.
And limiting someone's options isn't something to be taken lightly. Halfway through 2021, Rovio put out another, more revised statement, providing some reasons why the games were taken out of circulation, saying they wanted to focus on making newer and better games rather than updating games on an outdated engine. They ended it off by
Hold on, we got an ad coming up.
classic Angry Birds games back. And on the last day of March 2022, they re-released Angry Birds Classic. This is a remake of the original game.
I mean, at least
and while it's a
they
faithful
re-released.
remake, we're still missing many of the older Angry Birds.
Yeah,
titles,
we miss
like
it.
Space,
We missed them.
Season, Star Wars, or Epic. The only one of these games to get relisted was Bad Piggies, which is pretty cool, but like,
Yeah,
it was the other ones.
Yeah.
Currently, Rovio's in some pretty hot waters. Not only with the fan base, but also with the law? Yeah, so as it turns out, they were collecting the data of underage children. Oopsie. So what killed Angry
That's not good.
Birds? Besides the deletion of their older games, I think the biggest aspect of the decline was the shift from making original games to instead focus on their newer and honestly less inspired games.
Less inspired.
I'm not saying the series was super original before, but the creativity really took a hit after the release of Angry Birds Epic. And Rovio weren't even the ones that made that game. There's actually a lot of similarities I found between the story of Rovio and PopCap, the company behind Plants vs. Zombies, a game that released that same year. They both got massively popular off of one game, and had to do whatever they could to keep it afloat. I think the biggest difference between the two is that PopCap sold out to EA before the beginning of the decline, while Rovio tried to do everything on their own. And because of this, they ended up biting off more than they could chew, having to close several divisions and have a lot of layoffs due to the underperforming of their recent titles. Before the buyout, the scope of PopCap's games hadn't ever improved.
I remember playing Peggle.
With Rovio,
That was a good game.
after the first
Peggle's a
wave
good
of
game.
success, they
I played on the
immediately began
Xbox.
to work on massive projects, like several grander spin-offs, and the 2 feature films. I believe the biggest issue was that, like anything that gets super popular, Angry Birds was always just a fad. And instead of branching out into other things early on, Rovio just kept making Angry Birds games. They put all their eggs in one nest, and after a while, the pigs were there to steal them.
That's true. That is true. Well, that was what killed Angry Birds franchise. Now we learn what killed the Angry Birds franchise.